California's state senate passed a bill last night that could result in a doctor's state license being revoked if they spread false or misleading medical information about COVID vaccines or treatments. According to Axios, the law would designate spreading false or misleading medical information to patients as, quote, unprofessional conduct, subject to punishment by the Medical Board of California.
If California Governor Gavin Newsom were to sign the bill into law, California would be the first state to take legal action against medical practitioners in response to the spread of false COVID information. So their rationale is that, well, this isn't just misinformation. If it's a doctor doing it, it's, they should know better. It's extra bad. Look, I just think this is totally insane because for an obvious problem of what qualifies as misinformation, and so many things that have been deemed misinformation have now been changed. That the idea that the changing, we've gone over this a million times, with the change on masks, on whether vaccines were preventing transmission. It was said that they were at the beginning. Now we know that it's not. And also look, doctors might, you might ask your doctor, should I get my child vaccinated? And different doctors might tell you reasonably different things, like, yeah, I'm all about vaccines, you should do it, it's really good for public health, etc. It's good for long COVID, good for all those reasons. Another doctor might say, you know what, your kid really is not at risk of COVID, and I don't see in the data any really differences in COVID, in performance while you have COVID between vaccinated and unvaccinated, so I can't really recommend you necessarily have to get it. And those are both perfectly valid opinions that we're kind of like litigating in the public policy sphere, but the idea that a doctor could lose his license for saying that, as they could under this policy, is insane.
Or how about that new study that talks about how it's increasingly looking like the risk of myocarditis for men under 40 from the vaccine is similar to the risk from getting COVID.
Yeah.
And if that's your primary concern, obviously there's other risk factors associated with actually getting COVID, including long COVID and things that we talked about yesterday on the show. But if that were your one-off and you had a history of heart issues, a doctor can make a recommendation based on that kind of a knowledge. And it also does seem to be in the situation that this is trying to address a problem that I'm not really sure exists, is the root of kind of a lack of vaccine compliance or whatever it is they're trying to get to the bottom of, really driven by misinformation from medical professionals?
Right. No, I don't think that it is. So the bill describes misinformation as false information that is contradicted by contemporary scientific, contrary to the standard of care. So there we have an obvious problem in that the scientific consensus is often not a consensus. There's often disagreement. There was disagreement at the top levels of our government about when and whether to recommend boosters for people. There were disagreements between Biden's team and Rochelle Walensky and other CD officials. There was dissension within the CDC about whether to really push boosters or not. Like, top people, very smart people whose entire jobs are to pore over these questions, reach different conclusions. So the idea that you would constrain doctors from going off script or off message, maybe the concern we're getting at here is ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or something. They want to constrain because my understanding is that some doctors did let the images are of people rushing the shelves to get ivermectin, but that some doctors did allow or prescribe because in that case, and while I don't think from looking at the data that it's particularly compelling data that ivermectin does help you, I think, and I've said on the show, I think the data that did show a very slight good outcome for ivermectin comes from other countries that actually do have a lot of intestinal parasites, and I think it probably helps people who have intestinal parasites who happen to also have COVID. But it's also not taken in appropriate doses. It's not harmful. It's not horse tranquilizer. It's given. There's nothing wrong with it, and also there's nothing wrong with healthy, safe experimentation of things like that, because if we were to find out that was beneficial, that would be a good thing. Now, people just doing it on their own is. I
think that there are already rules and regulations about the extent to which doctors can kind of be running these ad hoc trials out of their office and what is medically indicated for them to do and whether or not it goes outside of their duty to care. There's already rules about this. If a doctor is not performing in accordance with the Hippocratic Oath, there's already a whole regulatory agency within the profession to deal with this. And I wonder now that I think about it, and I think about how this would even be enforced. I mean, it would have to be a patient ratting out their doctor. If this is really more about preventing doctors like Leanna Wen, who have been publicly making statements that are, some people find to be out of step with the CDC or out of step with what quote unquote science says, keeping them from doing like a lecture tour circuit, let's say, and talking about issues in a way that is not liked very much by like the kind of Democratic Party consensus right now.
I mean, this is just a good example of California being utterly insane. I mean, this is so crazy.
Well, look, it's
no other state has done this or even considered anything like this.
California hasn't done it yet either, so we'll see what actually happens.
The legislature did. Gavin Newsom just maybe won't. I don't know if he's going to sign it or not. Is there any indication he will sign it? I'm not sure.
It's unclear, I think, right now. But look, it's a democracy. If people want to try to put this kind of thing forward, if this is the spirit of people in the state, the whole point of the Federalists among us is that they want these states to be test kitchens for different kinds of rules. And, the same way that I said this about whatever state it was, I think in the Southeast, that had some, it was school board discussion we were having last week about, banning certain books or not wanting a certain kind of education, about 1619 Project or what have you. If it votes, it floats. But I do think that this seems to be, even if you really did believe that there was medical misinformation that was causing harm to people, not a policy that's particularly targeted to getting at the root of it.
If what they're talking about is doctors spreading misinformation, like going on Fox News or saying things that the California legislature doesn't agree with. Now we're getting into, despite your comments about letting states experiment with different policies, we're getting into very clear First Amendment territory.
Yeah, I agree.
Just like absolute. I mean. The Supreme Court would slap this down in 5 seconds. It would be 9-0.
Because that is also that's attenuated from their actual medical practice. So like I was saying, sure, if you're prescribing something that's not medically indicated, then there's rules and there's a response to that that's already built in.
There's a liability
But you're allowed to go out and say whatever you want in the world, except for a law like this, which I do think will run into some issues.
So a group called the Physicians for Informed Consent filed a lawsuit earlier this month seeking an injunction against the Medical Board of California, citing First Amendment rights. The group said in a statement it wants to protect the free speech of all physicians in the state and calls the bill's definition of the word misinformation hopelessly vague. And this goes to a criticism I have of this entire misinformation industry, which has become such a misguided way of thinking about every issue. Borderline conspiratorial in tone, describing coordinated efforts often coordinated efforts originating outside the country by nefarious Russian actors, and that's why people are so confused, is because there's, look at the whiteboard, it's this group and this group. It's kind of Charlie from It's Always Sunny thinking about these issues in just an utterly, and then they end up sounding as crazy as the people they're criticizing who say crazy things.
God forbid people just talk to each other and have conversations about the gaps between their beliefs, the way that you did so nicely with Walker Bragman on my podcast last week or earlier this week. I think that it really helps to clarify the differences of opinion and what is legitimate, what is rooted in not having enough information yet, what is just a difference of opinion in terms of your appetite for shutdowns and different kind of social disruptions or cost-benefit analysis. That is such a much more progressive, productive conversation to be having than all of this conspiratorial, you just have bad faith, you're just, conspiratorial, you love horse
your Russian handlers have convinced you.
You're out to get everybody. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. This is toxic.
Well, Newsom is expected to make a decision on this in about 3 weeks, so we'll make sure to keep our eyes on any developments. And of course, we'll be back with more Rising in just a minute. Stay tuned.